This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Harvey will go down in history right alongside of Katrina. When they first caught sight of Harvey on the radar screen, they expected him to be a level 4, a category 4 hurricane. As it turned out, that's not what arrived. What arrived was a tropical storm. And of course, the main problem with that tropical storm was it was moving so slowly that it just kept dumping water and dumping water and dumping water. So as of Thursday, the numbers, go ahead and show us those numbers. This is as of Thursday. 20 trillion gallons of rain. I have no idea how they would even know that. 51 inches of rain, billions of dollars worth of losses, millions of people affected, homes destroyed, people rescued, people already registering for assistance. The numbers go on and on and on. Now, whenever anything like this happens, Katrina or Harvey, all sorts of stories and responses come to light. And Harvey was no different. One of the really beautiful stories that came to light happened at Furniture Gallery by a man named Mattress Mac. Mattress Mac is not his name is Jim, and he is the owner of Furniture Gallery. And early on, last Sunday, he made the decision to open up his store and welcome refugees. And so he was offering food and water and restrooms and a dry place to be, to stretch out on his sofas or beds or whatever. And of course, there were other stories along the way too. And one of those stories happened with Joel Osteen and Lakewood Church. This is a great big church that sits very close to downtown Houston. It seats 16,000 plus people, a $15 million church. And last Sunday, as the storm was brewing, Lakewood chose to keep their doors locked. They ended up playing a rerun sermon that day. The sermon was, I believe, called Pray for Your Neighbors. And as the week wore on, questions kept coming as to why this church was not open. And the first response I heard was, we didn't have enough staff to open the church. And then I heard, well, it was inaccessible at that point. And later on, the response was, we'll open up when the rest of the shelters are full. And finally, the final response I heard was, well, the city never asked us. I want to be clear, they have opened up. I do not know how many people are housed there now, but that has changed. Now, the point, and there is a point, the point is stumbling blocks, and stumbling blocks that get in the way. Just last week, a few sentences ahead of what we get this week, Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciples had the standard questions. John the Baptizer, Elijah, Jeremiah, one of the prophets. And then Jesus said very particularly, but who do you say that I am? And there's only one recorded response. It is Peter, who says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And of course, Jesus goes on to say, God has revealed this to you. And now just a few sentences later, we're a week later, but a few sentences later in the scripture, Jesus goes on to talk about what it means to be Messiah. Well, here's what it's going to look like. We're going to go to Jerusalem. And once we get to Jerusalem, there's going to be persecution. And then there's going to be death, and in order for there to be my resurrection. And Peter goes sideways. And Peter says, no way. That's not going to happen. That cannot possibly happen to you, Jesus. And Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." And in an instant, the cornerstone of the church becomes the stumbling stone of the church. And that stumbling stone pivots on this Messiah piece, because Peter knew the word Messiah. He knew that was the right answer, but Peter had no concept of what Messiah would mean. And Peter gets twisted Peter's will over God's will, and in that he becomes a stumbling block. So let's go back to Mattress Mac for just a moment, because Mattress Mac could have had all kinds of really decent reasons not to open up the store. Did Mattress Mac have enough staff that day? And was he opening himself up for a lawsuit if people came in and tripped and fell, or something happened, or the food, or was that going to become a problem for him? And what was going to happen with all of his inventory once it had been trampled on by the refugees from the floodwaters? What was going to happen to that? Mattress Mac had all sorts of potential reasons not to act in the way he did. And likewise, Joel Osteen and the people at Lakewood Church had some reasons. Well, we don't have staff, and we're inaccessible, and there are other shelters, and nobody asked us. But here's where we come right back to stumbling blocks. Because in the end, when we look at the way that Mattress Mac operated and the way Lakewood Church operated, which one of them ended up looking more like the church? And which one was more likely stepping in to where Jesus asks us to go, and what Jesus asks us to do with what's been putting into our hands? So today, as we think about stumbling blocks, as we think about God's will and our will, as we think about this whole point of Messiah, because Peter could not imagine the sort of Messiah that Jesus was going to be, I want us to think about church. And can we imagine what sort of church Christ is inviting us to be? And as we begin to imagine what sort of church Christ invites us into, Paul gives us some reference points. Paul says, love one another. Outdo one another in showing honor. Rejoice in hope. Be patient. Persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Extend hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Live peaceably. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. And overcome evil with good. On this day, as we can look around and maybe see other people's stumbling blocks pretty easily, the question comes back to us about this business of being church. Because in the same way that Peter had an idea of what Messiah meant, we all have a notion of what church means. But is our notion of church, and very particularly church in this place, is it the notion that God calls us into? Are there potentially stumbling blocks that are between us and living out the vision that God has for us? Can we continue to imagine what it means to live out lives of forgiveness and grace and service in the way that God would have us do that in this place. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Amen.
Well, this light of mine,